Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Carefully Speaking. In the last episode, we talked about choosing love without losing yourself. And when I sat with that conversation, something came up for me. Romantic relationships are not the only relationships that shape our well-being, right? We're also in relationships with money, with work, with ambition, with productivity, with status, and with stability. In those relationships, they also shape our nervous systems in ways just as much as people do. And so today, I want to ask a different question. What does it look like to choose success without losing yourself? And so with that, today's episode is titled, Earning More and Losing What? This is not going to be an episode about budgeting. I promise you I will not be giving any financial advice, but I will be providing an opportunity to have more of a reflective conversation about income versus outcome. We focus so much on income, right? We don't take enough time to pause and ask about the outcomes of our success. So today I want to talk about our relationships with money and how that relationship or those relationships impact our well-being. So let's talk about it. All right, so let's kick off this conversation by talking about income versus outcome. So what is income? Income is visible, right? Income is tangible, it's measurable, it's the things that people can count on, post, and report. Salaries, bonuses, revenue, degrees, titles, number of clients, number of patients, number of students, right? Social media growth. Those are all trackable and traceable, and they look really good on paper. They're metrics, right? And they answer the question, what did you earn, or what is your income? But on the other hand, outcome is our lived experiences, right? Outcome is what your earnings produce in your body, in your relationships, in your peace, and in your sense of self. Outcome is what income produces internally and relationally. So some examples of emotional outcomes: confidence, pride, empowerment, maybe even fear or pressure, guilt, right? Nervous system hypervigilance, anxiety, relief, chronic stress, emotional depletion, burnout, right? Those are all examples of emotional outcomes. Some relational outcomes include being able to support your loved ones financially, right? Or increased expectations from relatives, or maybe even isolation, right? No one understands my life right now. It can even be strained relationships or power shifts in relationships, maybe less time with your family, maybe tension around money conversations or feeling like the responsible one. Yeah. And then there's some physical outcomes, right? Sleep disruption, appetite changes, exhaustion, fatigue. And on the positive side, maybe access to healthcare or being able to travel and living in safe environments. And then we have some spiritual outcomes and identity outcomes. And those are an increased sense of purpose, right? Expanded worldview, hobbies and joy, right? Identity tied to certain productivity or maybe even disconnection from ourselves. So when we talk about income, we're talking about numbers, metrics, right? When we talk about outcome, we're talking about alignment. So you can earn more and feel safe. You can earn more and expand your freedom, or you can earn a promotion and lose evenings with your children. You can increase your revenue, but also increase your anxiety. You can build generational wealth and inherit generational pressure. You can even double your salary and half your peace. Sometimes when we increase one thing, we slowly erode something else. And we live in a grind culture, right? A culture that celebrates doing more, earning more, grinding, advancing, building, scaling. But we don't ask ourselves, what does that income cost me emotionally, right? What is my income creating for me relationally? What's the outcome of my ambition? Does my income support my values, or does it just maintain my image? And listen to me, this is not a judgment, right? This is real. These are real questions. Because it's not a surprise. It's not a surprise that as people are scaling up and earning more, they're feeling more depleted, chasing advancement and losing peace, increasing income but not assessing the impact, achieving all the milestones without asking, what's the cost? And that is the real conversation that I want to have today. And next, I want to talk more about the psychology of money and chasing advancement. All right, so I want to talk about the psychological layer, right? Because you all know that I'm a social worker, or if you don't, I am a social worker. So I look at things from a clinical lens, right? And from a clinical lens, money is rarely just about money, okay? Money can represent things like emotional safety. It can represent validation. It can represent control or even identity. Money can represent proof of worth. And for many people, money equals survival, right? Money equals protection from childhood trauma. Money equals, I will never have to struggle like that again. But what happens when your nervous system stays in that performance and survival mode, even when you're technically stable and safe? For some people, income becomes their identity. The question, what do you do for a living? That question becomes who you are. Your salary becomes your self-worth, and achievement becomes your personality. Now, in passing, that simple question, what do you do for a living? That can just be small talk, right? When I'm out, I get asked that question all the time. What do you do, Dr. Brown? But you know, that question is rarely ever neutral. Because what people are sometimes asking me is not about what I do. They're asking me, where do I stand? What have I achieved? How can I be ranked or measured? And what category should I be placed in? So when people ask me, what do you do, Dr. Brown? As a woman of color and the first doctor in my family, that question feels very loaded. Sometimes it feels like curiosity. Sometimes it feels like an assessment or a judgment. Sometimes it feels like I'm trying to be measured up. And I have had to notice what that question brings up for me. Does it make me stand up taller? Does it make me brace myself? Does it make me feel proud? Does it make me feel exposed? Because when our identity is tied to what we earn and what we do, that question, what do you do? That question can feel like an evaluation of our worth. And that's really the psychology of it all, right? When income and achievement become our identity, we start to regulate ourselves around how we are perceived. And if your identity depends on your earning, what happens when your income starts to fluctuate, right? What happens when you're in between opportunities? What happens when you want to rest, but resting feels like you're being unproductive or that you're disappearing? Burnout, disconnection, stability, freedom. What happens, right? What's the real outcome of what you earn? Sometimes we increase income while decreasing our well-being. And that's where the emotional cost begins to show up. When we identify with money, with income, our nervous system starts to regulate around performance. We don't just want stability. We want proof. We don't just want money. We want confirmation that we matter. And that's heavy, right? That's real. That's the real psychological layer that creates tension. And next, I want to talk to you about the emotional cost of tying identity with income. All right, so I want to talk honestly about the emotional cost of ambition, right? I want to start off by saying that ambition is not the enemy. Success is not the enemy. Money is not even the enemy. But too much of anything is never good without balance. And unsustainable ambition can cost us things that we don't always calculate. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean things like chronic stress. I mean things like our mental health, our physical health, right? I mean things like our presence, being absent from our own lives, disconnected from happiness and from joy. So I invite you to ask yourself this question. Are you earning more and losing connection and presence? Are you earning more and losing rest and restoration? Are you earning more and losing your ability to enjoy what you have built? Please believe me that this is not an attack, okay? This is an invitation. It is an opportunity to reflect and meet yourself where you are, because the real question is not, how can I earn more? The better question should be, what will earning more require of me? Will it require more time? Will it require more physical or emotional labor? Will it require more sacrifices? Maybe it'll require more visibility, or maybe even more pressure to maintain and perform. And then the other important question, do I even have the capacity to sustain the level of rigor that is needed to earn more? Earning more isn't the problem. Losing yourself quietly along the way is the problem. So the question here is real, and it shows up when we think about cultural contexts, which is what I want to talk about in the next segment. So we've talked about the clinical lens, and I now want to talk to you about the cultural context. And from a cultural perspective, income is not just an individual achievement. It's often a collective one. And I will include myself in this conversation, right? Because as a first-generation doctor in my family, income has never just been about money to me. Having success has been healing. It's allowed me to gain access to certain spaces and opportunities and to have resources. And it's also meant being able to rewrite the narrative of what wasn't always possible for the generations that came before me. But having that realization, it carries some weight. The weight of being the one who made it. The weight of being the one who succeeded. The weight of not wanting to fumble what those who came before me didn't have access to. And the weight of knowing that my income is not just my income, right? It represents stability for everyone. And I am appreciative of where I am and where I stand. But appreciation, it doesn't cancel out the emotional reality. There is a dichotomy here. Both gratitude and burden can coexist. And for many other first-generation professionals, especially people of color, income is not just personal. It's collective, it's symbolic, it's historical, and it's protective. And sometimes it's heavy. Sometimes when you're the first, or maybe even the last from a large lineage, you don't just carry your own ambition. No, you carry proof of legacy. You carry high expectation. You carry future possibilities for other people. And that can create a heightened sense of over-responsibility, right? Maybe a fear of failure or of regression, a pressure to maintain stability at all costs, and difficulty allowing yourself to rest. So when income represents not just your own individual achievement, but also generational achievement, which it sometimes does in certain communities, it can also create generational pressure. And that's real. That's not a judgment, right? That's honest. And what I'm inviting here is a nuanced way of thinking, because this isn't about rejecting ambition. It's not about shrinking yourself, and it's not about pretending that money doesn't matter. Of course, money matters, right? Of course, access and security and stability matters. But so does your nervous system. So does your peace. So does your presence, and so does your body. So maybe the question isn't, how do I earn more? Maybe the question is, how do I build success that I can actually live inside of? So next, I want to talk about redefining sustainable access. All right, so now I want to talk about how to redefine success as something that is sustainable. And if you've been listening to me for a while, you know that I always want to leave you with something to think about. And in this case, it's something to reframe. And the reframe isn't, how can I earn more money? The reframe is, what's the outcome of how I earn? Does my income support my nervous system? And that is really such a great question that we don't ask ourselves enough. Does my income support my nervous system? Not just my bills, not just my lifestyle, but my nervous system. Does my income align with my values? Does it allow me to be present in my relationships? Does it give me freedom? Freedom to choose how I spend my time and my energy? Or does it just give me more responsibility? Right? Success that costs you your well-being is not sustainable. And I'll even argue that success which costs you your well-being is not really success. It is not a win-win. And making pivots when recognizing the cost of success, that is not laziness. That is maturity. You can be ambitious and still be emotionally regulated. You can be successful and still have time to rest. You can also build wealth while protecting your peace at the same time. But you know what? It does require real intention. It requires boundaries, and it requires an awareness of your capacity, and it requires alignment. So here's what I want to leave you with today. Income is what you earn, right? Outcome is what it produces. And the real work isn't just about increasing what you make. It's about being honest about what those things create in your life. And as you start to think about your own relationships with money and success, I invite you to ask yourself this question. What is my income producing in my body, in my relationships, in my sense of self? Am I earning more and losing what matters, or am I building something that allows me to remain whole? Because just like in our love conversation, the goal is not to lose yourself in the process. No, it's to choose growth without abandoning your well-being. And so I want to thank you again for being here with me, Dr. Jamila Brown. And as always, thank you for speaking carefully. Until next time.